Hi everyone, Catherine Rhodes here. Time to talk about Chapter 4 in our book, Testing and Selecting Employees. When you finish this chapter, the learning objectives are: define basic testing concepts, including the concepts of validity and reliability, discuss at least 4 basic types of personnel test, explain the pros and cons of background investigations, reference checks, pre-employment information services, explain the factors and problems that can undermine an interview's usefulness and techniques for eliminating them. Well, why is selection of employees such an important issue? Why do we take a lot of time and effort in trying to get the right employee? Well, as a manager, your performance depends upon the people that work for you. You want to screen out those individuals who are not going to do a good job. You don't want to waste any kind of money. And then there's an issue of incompetent selection or negligent hiring. Well, what about reliability, and what is reliability? It's a consistency of scores obtained by the same person when retested with an identical test or an alternative form. There's the equivalent form estimate or the internal comparison estimate. Validity means that the job or the test should be job related, and the performance on tests should be a valid predictor of subsequent performance on the job. Validity comes in 2 different types: criterion validity or content validity. Criterion validity is those who do well on the test will also do well on the job, and those who do poorly on the test would do poorly on the job. And content validity means that the test constitutes a fair sample of the content of a job. So what about the ethical and legal questions that you can ask in testing? Well, you have to be able to provide and prove that your tests are related to the success or failure on the job. And you have to prove that your tests don't unfairly discriminate against either minority or non-minority subgroups. And testing took a bad rap several decades ago, and individuals nowadays sometimes don't even give tests. But you want to be able to do that. One of the tests that we used to give back, about 18 years ago was a simple math test. And we had that challenged one time, and it was just simple arithmetic. And the reason we gave that test for our employees that were going to work out on the floor in an automotive plant was because they actually had to do some quality information. They had to do some sampling. And the sampling was where they had to be able to measure things, add up 5 numbers with decimal points, and then divide by 5. And we let them use a calculator. So we did simple addition and subtraction and multiplication and division. And what we found was pretty upsetting. Only about 40% of the individuals who took that, and it was just a 15-question math test. And what we did in order to prove that it was valid was we showed where it was job related, and then we also had individuals who were doing well on the job take the test, and we based it upon what their average score was. You also want to make sure that you don't have adverse impact. And adverse impact is where you have a significant discrepancy between the rates of rejection of members of a protected group, whether that be female, ethnicity, religion, all of the various areas that are protected under the law. So, what about using test? Well, Outback and other places use test, and they call it personality assessment, or you can use intelligent quest tests like Wonderlic. There are some great tests, and I've used those before when we were trying to select individuals for apprenticeship programs classes, and that one of them is the mechanical comprehension test. And those individuals who do well on that can then go on and do well in that program. You can test motor or physical abilities, but you better make sure that that is a a requirement of the job, otherwise you can get into issues with ADA. And then there are personality tests, extroversion, emotional stability, agreeableness, conscientiousness, openness to experience. But it can be difficult to evaluate and to use, and usually you have to have an expert who can help you with that. So why use personality test? Well, personality tests can help you if you're looking for a sales manager. You want an extrovert, somebody who is comfortable talking to strangers and who's very outgoing. You can use interest inventories. What are people interested in? So that you can help select them for the correct occupation. Or achievement test those who have certain characteristics and abilities. A lot of tests nowadays are given on the web, and some of the new tests for call centers, you have to complete an application online, and then you have to do an online math test. And sometimes you can even do online role-playing call simulations where a customer will call you on the phone and they record you. And I know that a lot of us, when we've called to make a reservation, you get that thing that says, this call may be monitored or recorded for training purposes. So there's that sort of thing. You can also do work sampling, and that tries to predict job performance by requiring job candidates to perform one or more actual samples of the job task, and then an observer either monitors or assesses performance. One of the things that happens is you can have a management candidate take tests and make decisions in simulated situations. I've seen these in in-basket tests where you have an in-basket, and nowadays you do that through an email system where you have to quickly assess the different issues and then rank them and how you would approach them. And that can be very good, but it can also take a lot of time. You can have leaderless group discussions to see how people, what the dynamics of a group is and how people interact to one another. And again, you have to have somebody who's going to assess that and to evaluate that. You can ask, as we do here at the college, when we have a person who's interested in teaching, they can be asked to do a teaching presentation of 5 to 10 minutes so that we can assess their ability to speak clearly, to be able to get points across, and what their teaching style is. You can also do situational judgment tests, which is designed to assess an applicant's judgment. So you can ask them a question and then have them to assess and make a decision based upon that. And then, of course, you get into the whole thing about interviews. How do you interview someone based upon an oral response? Well, there are two schools of thought. You can have a non-structured interview where the interviewer just asks questions as they come to mind and there's no set format. Or you can have a structured interview where questions are specified in advance and responses can be rated, or it can be called a directive interview. Personally, I prefer a structured interview where you know what questions you want to ask, and then that way when you're interviewing more than one candidate, you can ask the same questions. Otherwise, you can get into difficulty with why'd you ask one person a question and the other person you did not ask that question. You can do situational interviews where you focus on the candidate's ability to project what their behavior has been, or a behavioral interview, which I like, is to ask applicants how they've behaved in the past in a situation. So Citizens Bank, it talks about they switched to behavioral interviewers, and Cynthia Wilson said that in that point in time it made it much more difficult for people to be selected who weren't good for the job. You can have a sequential interview where several people interview the applicant in sequence before making a hiring decision. Or you can have a panel interview where the candidate's interviewed simultaneously by a group or panel. So how useful are interviews? Well, interviews can have a really high validity, and situational interviews tend to yield a higher mean. Structured interviews are more predictive in job performance, and individual interviews tend to be more valid than panel interviews. Although when I would come together, I would have one person go through an interview with multiple people and then bring the whole group back together to talk about the candidate's strengths. So what are some of the common interviewing mistakes that people make? They make snap judgments based upon how people look or how they get along with them. There can be negative emphasis. If they don't know the job, it's difficult for them to interview. There can be pressure to hire. There can be influence of nonverbal behavior, attractiveness, race, ingratiation. I had one interviewee one time who was trying to find out if I like to play golf. And one of the individuals in the interview, there were two of us interviewing the same person. What happened is that they started talking golf instead of doing the interview. So that's not what you want to do. So you want to start the interview with a clear picture of what you're looking for. Base questions on actual job duties. Use job knowledge and objective criteria. You want to train interviewers. You want to use the same questions on all. Use a rating scale to rate answers. You can use a scale of 1 through 5. Use multiple interviewers or panel interviews, not just have one person make up their mind about hiring one person. Use a structured interview form. I always put together an interview form where people can write their answers in and to take notes. Because if you're interviewing more than one candidate during a day, they all tend to run together. There's a lot of questions in there in the book that talk about, and in fact, as you go through and do your little exercise, you'll have an opportunity to come up with some different questions. You want to establish rapport. You want to ask questions. You want to make it clear that you're going to conduct reference checks, and then you want to close the interview but give the person an opportunity to ask questions. Don't ask close-ended questions that can be answered yes, no, 1, 2, 5, 7. Don't put words in the applicant's mouth or give them an indication of what the answer is that you're looking for. But don't interrogate the person so that they feel like they've got a spotlight on them. Don't be patronizing, sarcastic, or inattentive. Don't monopolize the interview time by rambling. Ask open-ended questions. Listen to the candidate. Draw out the applicant's opinions and feelings and ask for examples. Then you get into the background check. You want to verify the accuracy of factual information, and you may want to do a background check, such as a criminal record check. And that happens more and more. And nowadays, employers are checking social networking sites, such as LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, to find out what's going on with those individuals. So how do you do a good reference check? We'll use a structured form. Use references offered by the applicant as a source, but you can ask that individual to give you another reference. Ask open-ended questions, and make sure that you field requests for references from authorized managers. There's a lot of talk about honesty testing, whether it's polygraph, paper and pencil honesty test. Drug screening is very common, and then physical exams. But you also have to comply with immigration law and fill out an I-9 form. The person does not have to be a U.S. citizen, but they do have to be able to lawfully work in the United States. You can't use the I-9 employment eligibility verification form to discriminate based upon race or country of origin, but you do have to use it to verify the I-9, and once you get that information, it should be separated in the file. Hope you found out a lot more than you knew before about testing and interviewing. I used to do a lot of it, and let me tell you, it can be difficult. Hope this has been useful to you. This is Chapter 4. Let's mark that off, the end of Module 2. Make sure that you do your environmental scan. Make sure you do your quizzes on Chapters 3 and 4. And make sure you do your postings and get your interview questions in. I'll be checking with you online and can't wait to hear more about it. Thanks, and I'll see you next time. Bye.